Once upon a time, if you wanted a sense of just how much money was being generated across the economy, you'd look for one big number, gross domestic product, and we used to get it on a quarterly basis. So every 3 months you get the figure, and that's what we focused on. And then a few years ago, the Office for National Statistics decided that we wanted these numbers monthly instead. It was mostly their decision. I quite like figures, but frankly, these monthly figures are really volatile, and so it's worth just being a little bit cautious about them. But nonetheless, here's what we have. So the latest figure shows that monthly gross domestic product, the amount of money generated across the economy, was 0.0% in July. Actually, if you look even more decimal places, it's an ever so slight fall. But nonetheless, the point is, these numbers are volatile, and you can kind of see it in these bars. Look, they're bouncing around all over the place. The previous month, June, it was 0.4%, which was kind of better than expected. And then you've got these negative, and then you've got the positive. The better thing to do, OK, is to just look at a 3-monthly average, and then you're having a sense of how the economy is doing. It was relatively weak last year, towards the end of last year. Then it got stronger. And now it's kind of heading downwards again. And if you kind of look at a breakdown of those figures, just kind of breaking down different parts of the economy, because what are we talking about here? We're talking about all businesses across the UK. The majority of those businesses are doing services. So whether it's kind of hairdressers, legal services, that's 80% of the economy. And that is the light blue part there. And you can see that stays pretty strong. Each of these bars are basically showing you the contribution to that growth rate. The bit that's weak, that purple is construction. The bit that's weak recently, that's manufacturing, and that's production. So it's making stuff. And, to some extent, that might be to do with what we've seen recently with tariffs. So people making a lot of stuff before the tariffs came in, those dark blue bars, getting it across to the US, and then making less stuff in the summer. That might be one of the explanations. But as I say, it's volatile. But if we kind of take an even bigger step back and just look at the total size of the economy, this is quite interesting here. So this is showing you, again, the size of total GDP across the UK and how it's changed since the middle of 2022. 2.8% bigger, OK? So you've got 2.8% growth over that period, kind of a couple of years or so. But if you look instead, it's 3 years, I should say, at different parts of the economy, you see there are variant stories here. So construction has actually done quite well. Lots of construction happening. Services, as I say, 80% of everything we do, that's up by a little bit more than the total. But manufacturing has got weaker. And this goes to a bigger story. With energy costs having gone up so much, we are starting to see a deindustrialisation of the UK. We've already kind of deindustrialised more than most other countries around the world. But you see it really strikingly just in the last few years with the chemicals sector. Britain used to be one of the world's biggest chemicals powerhouses. And now look at where chemicals output has been in recent years. Down by 20%. And actually, if you look back, that's the middle of 2022 we're talking about there. If you look back to the start of 2022, so before the Ukraine war started, actually it's down by 30%. So really striking variation that we're seeing here across the economy. One thing I just wanted to say before we finish, OK, because this is important. A lot of speculation about what the Chancellor is going to do in the budget, and you might be wondering to yourself, what do those figures we've just seen have to do with all of that? Well, actually quite a lot, OK? And the reason for that is that the Chancellor has a certain amount of headroom against her fiscal rules, kind of leeway she's left herself in terms of her borrowing before she breaks those rules. And at the time of the last budget, it was about £10 billion. OK, then, since then, as you know, we've had all of these U-turns. So you had the U-turn on winter fuel allowance. That's going to cost a bit of money. The rules are still intact, but it kind of grinds it down because you're having to spend more money on that. You've got the fact that they couldn't get through the welfare reforms they wanted to, so they're having to spend an extra £5.5 billion on that. Still, the rules are intact at that point. But here's where the growth starts to come in, OK? Because if you assume that the economy is going to be growing less quickly than expected, that means less tax revenue coming in because there's just less money being generated across the UK. And if that's the case, even if kind of a relatively small downgrade by the Office for Budget Responsibility for future growth, then you're talking about those rules instantly being smashed. And that's, I showed you previously the impact of the U-turn. You can see from that, the growth impact is much bigger. And that's why all of this growth stuff matters. It matters because if the Chancellor is going to try and deal with that, if the OBR says the economy is not growing as much, then she has to potentially find a way of getting back to her fiscal rules. And that means potentially spending cuts, but more likely tax rises, given what we've heard recently. So it all fits together. And that is why these growth numbers are quite so important.